Um, it just, I've had this conversation with Michael Hedek, who I think is like, I just have to mention that just a great poet and human.
Yes, he is.
And we both talk about the tenderness we feel towards animals, and the tenderness we feel toward, especially now, because of this thing that we're talking about, because of the juxtaposition of the man-made and the natural, and how the man-made is even more encroaching on what little places the natural had. And you see animals like, you see them in this disturbed kind of place caught between these two worlds, and it makes me really, really sad. Really, really sad, and
at the same time, you're not taking a didactic approach. I like the sort of say it, but say it slant.
Yeah, I mean,
because
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, again, I think witnessing and saying, this is what I see, and this is like, and to a certain extent, how you feel about it is going to show up in what you write, but not making the, it's not like an argumentative essay in comp class where you're leading towards the conclusion where you say, and here's what we must do, ladies. And I have to say, though, that in my nature writing workshops, we do use a book, and environmental and nature writing, that does have a whole chapter on activism and how to write, like, argumentatively but I think that's a different space. That's not poetry, and it's not creative writing.
Nonetheless, I think you are able to occupy that space in a subtle way. And I think that's much more effective, frankly, than something that often, to me at least, feels diatribe or hysterical.
Yeah, I don't have any. I think one of the really great benefits of getting older is like the diatribe part of me is like relaxing.
I also particularly enjoyed many of your characters, your Aunt Sarah and her quirkiness, Annie, your grandma, even, and speaking of animals, I think of that mean son of a bitch goat.
That goat, yeah. I have a picture at school behind my computer on a little bulletin board. That's a picture of me sitting with my mom, and I must be like 3 years old, in front of that farmhouse where my grandma, I spent so much time. And you can see the goat in the background. And he was just it was not a pleasant creature. It was not. But then again, I don't want to speak negatively of goats everywhere. I've spent a month in Spain several years ago, and like the goats were great. The goats were great,
You have a point. However, I have a family story in which my mother was dealing with the goat who was kind of irascible. So maybe I'm prone to believe in that stereotype. But Billy Buck, the plow horse, you treat with
Billy Buck
affection.
was beautiful, beautiful horse, and he lived to be into his mid-20s. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him, because it was like, it's like some of the images from childhood, that are just, just so amazing. That horse, it was just, he was year after year after year after year, and it was at a time when it was really interesting. My grandfather was a sharecropper, and so it was like hand to mouth, and he really did into the early 60s at least, he was using the horse to plow for the tobacco. And he was using the horse when they harvested the tobacco, and they had a sled and they picked the leaves and stuff. That was by horse. And so it was a different, you know, that's kind of like, I think I read something, a short story a while back about it was called Mule Killers. And it was about how in the middle of the 20th century, when the tractor became predominant, the mules were all shipped off to slaughterhouses and stuff because they had no use for them. And it was a really, really sad, because the mules were intelligent and people had relationships with them and stuff. And I've never forgotten that. And I think that that horse and the fact that he had he had a hard life, but he spent a lot of time just grazing in a pasture, you know, in a very beautiful place. So, you know, I don't know, he kind of was like kind of happiness to me a little bit, you know. And I like that the idea of a world that's moving that slowly.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Despite the hard work, with plenty of time for ease. Loafing.
Yeah, well, I think if you were a kid, you had time for ease. I don't think my grandfather, I think it was a really difficult, he never really made any money, and he had to pay rent on this place where he lived and pay for the crops and all that kind of stuff. So he had to do like part-time work in the winter for most of his life. So it wasn't, I think for the adults, it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
You know.
One thing I was curious about, and I actually laughed out loud when I saw it the first time, was your book is in 3 sections, and you have an epigraph, which is a Burma shave quotation, which I just found delightful. Where did you get that idea? And I would love it if you would just at least read us your 3 Burma shave.
Oh, sure. Well, what happened was, one of a really distinct memory I have as a kid, because my dad was in the Navy, we were always driving back to my grandma's. And so a lot of times we were like in Norfolk, Virginia, and it was like a 3-hour drive through these like rolling hills and, you know, very rural kind of drive. And the Burma shave signs, as a kid, I would see them, and it was just part of the landscape, Burma shave, you know. And I would read them, and I would think, you know, because I was a kid, I would think that's kind of weird, and that's kind of, but it was always there. It was like seeing the red man signs on barns, and, you know, there's a particular kind of feel to, you know, the south side of Virginia, and especially in the south, you know. And so I thought about like the Burma shave signs, and of course I don't remember the Burma shave signs from, you know, I didn't remember them. So what do? You Google them, and you find out there's like, you can get every, you know, they have them broken down into the years. So you can see the evolution of the Burma shave signs through the years and the different things that they dealt with. And you can see the Burma shave signs during World War II and before World War II during the Depression. And I have a feeling that there's probably some kind of book waiting to be written interpreting Burma shave signs and
U.S. history.
Yeah, and so I particularly love the first one that I have at the beginning, the very beginning of the book, before part 1, because it just encapsulates everything I think about everything. If harmony is what you crave, then get a tuba, Burma shave. And to me, it was like, yeah, if you expect life to be this smooth kind of nice ride, you know, with everything just kind of fitting together and all that, get a tuba, man, because that's, you know, and I love that for the beginning of the book. Let's see. Why am I, okay. Part 2, Confluence. There's a poem I wrote called Confluence, and it was just to me, the idea of it, how everything, you know, it's like everything is just like constantly flowing into everything. And there's like the idea of the perpetual present is all that we have, you know. And so the thing I got for that, woe to all sinners who this way pass, Burma shave, which is, you know, that's my childhood, man. That's
Well, the
and it's like
juxtaposition.
what that has to do with shaving cream, I don't know. I don't really know.
But it's delightful in its juxtaposition, the woe to all sinners, and then this, you know, American capitalistic company. I love it.
And the last one, I think, again, you know, I had to choose 3 and I could have chosen 30. I could have had like a Burma shave for every poem. Maybe I'll do that someday. The last part of the book is called Modern Life. And the Burma shave quote that I selected, in this world of toil and sin, your head grows bald, but not your chin, Burma shave. And that to me, it seemed appropriate in a lot of ways, and, you know, physical. And the idea of the world of toil and sin is like, yeah, it is that. It's a lot of other things, but it's certainly that. And yeah, I mean, to me, it also captures more than the first 2. Well, the first one was kind of funny, but many of the Burma shave things are kind of oddly funny. You know, they're not like, ha, 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 you know, but they are. There's one, you know, one of my favorite Burma shave things is like, the only place for admiring curves, you know, is at the beauty show or something.
Yeah.
It's sexist and it's kind of dumb, but you know,
that's what we were as a culture, maybe.
Yeah. So I love, to me, when I think about Burma shave, it's like those signs were on the side of the road, and I did read them as a kid, and they did like, they were sort of like, if you're going on a long trip, they're kind of entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I have to say, when you're like 6 or 7 years old, they're kind of mystifying. But, you know, you internalize them, and then you get old and you think, oh, Burma shave.
I must confess, when I finished your book, I did look up, I Googled Burma shave, and I've got to figure out how to incorporate a Burma shave saying in something, because it's just fun.
Yeah, it's probably, all of the Burma shave things, if you put them all together, it would probably be a way to live your life. And clean shaven.
For those who are looking for answers, we'll send them to Burma shave.
Yeah, Burma shave's got them.
So I'm wondering if you have any advice to young poets other than reading, which is obvious. Is there anything else you would say to someone who's like embarking about to settle into the harness of poetry?
I would say, it's again, it's like I feel like everything has been expressed so well by my elders, my poetry elders, and it's like Frost, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, and just the notion that, and it's all I seem to be saying in my creative writing classes, is the real joy, the real everything that's really amazing about writing poems comes when you start with like a trigger and then you just follow it. And you allow yourself to, somehow you have to get to the subconscious. You have to.
Mhm.
And then if you do that, it's like you have to be willing to sit. For me, it's like, I know my poems leap a lot, but if you saw the earlier drafts, they leap even more. And so for me, it's like I have to be willing to leap, 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 and just trust the process and realize that it's like my first responsibility is just to follow that, and not try to lead it anywhere and just see, because this is where I'm going to discover what the poem is. And again, everyone says, it's like you write a good poem and you have no idea where the heck it came from.
Well, Mike, I'd rather be a cowboy starting off with a discussion of gerunds and ending up in Wyoming. It was wonderful, the whimsy of it.
That to me is like, that was a certain period. I think I was like reading, I like to read like nonfiction, especially historical nonfiction.
Right.
And Custer's Last Stand is like, I'm fascinated with that, and I've actually been out there to Wyoming and Montana. And so that, during writing those poems, that landscape was in my head and that history was in my head. And Custer was roaming around with his wife, Libby, and they were like riding horses on the plains and spearing rattlesnakes and eating them for dinner and all kinds of stuff. And Crazy Horse was out there having great dreams and planning his revenge on Custer. And so all this stuff was going on in my head. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is the only thing, the leaping, the trusting in the process of something that is not describable. It's like that interior place where all the dreams, everything you've ever read, all of your fears and hopes and loves and everything are kind of like churning around in a washing machine in there. And it's like when you write without expectation, when you write and you're willing to allow the leaping to take place, it's like when you access these things and then something else and then something else and then something else and then something else. And I would say the most important thing is to do that, to follow that architecture of your subconscious, wherever it takes you.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that happened to me that was really sort of profound, and I'm happy it happened early on, was the realization that revision was like as magical almost as the creation process. Because in revision, I would be looking at this thing and I would be seeing what really, you realize that now I'm making a poem.
Mm-hmm.
Before I was discovering, and now I'm like shaping it into something which if we're honest with ourselves, it's kind of, there's artifice involved and there's the shaping and all that stuff. And so I found myself, and I find myself still feeling an immense amount of excitement when I see the things that fit together and I take out the things that don't, you know, because that part of your brain can later on can do that more easily. If you do that when you're writing, then you're going to lose stuff because you can't. That's the important part for me. And then like the idea of like the excitement of revision and seeing like, yes, this is the poem. This is what belongs together. And also the stuff that you take out, you know, it's like it's like good. It might be another poem or it might be another. And so to me, there's just a richness about that, you know, just generating all that material. And for me, yeah, to get back to your original question, to me, the most important thing about writing poems is like getting up in the morning and sitting and just allowing that whole process to play out and just seeing what happens. And I don't know. If I knew what was going to happen, it would be, I could be immensely boring.
No fun.
So yeah, and the other thing that's happened is like I'm looking, God, I've been writing steadily for like 25 years. And I'm just like amazed at going over, like you're talking about the revision process and looking back. I'm like going through files that I wrote like 15 years ago, and I'm looking at stuff I don't even remember writing it half the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And yet now I can revise it, you know.
Yeah.
Now I can see like, hey, and so it's like there's like 25 years of my life and the things I was thinking about and worrying about and obsessing about and all of the beliefs and things my brain was doing, I have a record of that. It's not like a journal where, you know, I went to Starbucks and had coffee with Frank and it was good. I had a latte. No, it's not like that. It's like on this particular day, I dreamed I was a wolf and I lived in Chicago and I went out in the alley behind my house and started chasing my neighbors, you know, and I was drooling. I find stuff like that all the time, you know, and it's like, you know, it's strange. It's very strange, but it's, it's like a journal of your subconscious, you know, so it's kind of cool.
Wonderfully cool. Thank you so much, Jesse. I'm wondering, would you mind finishing with a poem?
God, a poem. Jeez.
I have some candidates if you're having trouble.
Tell me what you would like to hear.
I love Until I Was Direction, I'd Rather Be a Cowboy, Sky Language, Out of the Midst of Fire.
Since we've talked about it, why don't I do I'd Rather Be a Cowboy?
I love that one. I love it.
And for all of the would-be young poets out there, I can say that there's a funny story about this poem is that it was published in a really good magazine years and years ago with a typo. I mean, not with a subject-verb agreement error that I didn't find until I was doing this book. But that's neither here nor there. Okay. I'd rather be a cowboy. In my composition class on Monday, I'm asked if the world will end on April 23rd, as predicted by a Christian cult. I wanted them to ask me about the difference between an independent clause. I asked another student to give me an example of a gerund. He told me he'd rather identify a different part of speech. I told him I'd rather be a cowboy. And I have to say, this is like literal. This is exactly what happened. I told him I'd rather be a cowboy. Because if I were a cowboy, I could ride my horse across the Great Plains, past the remnants of Crow encampments, past the chattering prairie dog towns, up and down 1,000 hills until I reached the shadow of the snowy bighorns. Yes, I'd much rather be a cowboy in Wyoming, where geologic time has stiffened the landscapes into a ragged beauty of buttes and crevices that seems permanent, though we know it is not. For a moment, however, on my horse riding beneath the unending sky, I could pretend I was immortal, that the mountains at the edge of this world are sentinels praising more mountains that linger beyond their jagged summits. But beyond those mountains is merely Idaho. 200 years ago, the Crow thought that beyond the mountains lived another entire world that we entered through smoking holes in the sky. Another world with its own mountains, its own bison, its own flurry of storms in April. I imagine Indian paintbrush blooming in a Crow heaven. I imagine a prairie storm that comes on so quickly the creosote barely has time to lie down before the rain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse.